Hey everyone, this is Darcinovia here. It's been a year, hasn't it, since I reviewed Post Return of the Jedi material. Wait, no, scratch that. It's been over a year. Jesus, it's almost been 2 years, actually, at this point. Now that I think about it. I mean, the last Post Return of the Jedi, related story that I reviewed was Invincible, which was the last book of Legacy of the Force. And it's also almost 100 reviews ago, almost. It's like, holy crap. I figured, you know what? I have no intention of reviewing Fate of the Jedi for a while, but I got to review something related to Post Return of the Jedi, and something clicked to me. I'm reviewing the Dark Times comics, and the Old Republic, and also the Empire and Rebellion comics, and considering the fact that a certain story arc is featured in all those comics, why not review Legacy? And that's what I'm going to do. This is the first story arc of Legacy, Broken. Now, the Legacy comics are a series of comics that take place over 100 years after Return of the Jedi. And can say you could read these as your first expanded universe story with no problems. Call me crazy, but hear me out. If you're familiar with the movies, you're going to get into this without feeling lost. Sure, some of the EU references are going to be lost on you, but if you actually are familiar enough with the films, of course, I assume everyone who's watching these reviews have at least seen the films a billion times. You're not going to have any problems reading these comics. In fact, I read this back in the day when I barely read anything in the EU. I mean, yes, I've read some other stuff, but I've read Jango Fett Open Seasons, and I played Knights of the Old Republic. So, I haven't really experienced anything else in the EU. Nothing post-Return of the Jedi. And I've read this, no problem. Now, the very concept of having a storyline that takes place after all the main characters are gone is a good one. And eventually is going to have to happen. Because, I mean, let's be realistic here, people. You can't tell, stories of Luke, Han, and Leia when they're like 100 and something years old. I mean, it's going to get ridiculous at this point. Eventually, the characters have to be retired. And it's going to happen sooner or later. So I think Legacy was a good way of transitioning from, that into an era where when they're gone, where you could actually tell stories without them. And don't get me wrong, I love Luke, Han, and Leia, but you cannot continue to tell stories with those characters. And of course, this still tells stories with their descendants. Cade, Skywalker, and I'm not going to mention the Fells because, well, one of them is a descendant of, Jaina and Jagged Fell. So, yeah, the storyline of their descendants still continues. And I'm actually do not mind actually having a descendant of Luke Skywalker. Because, Cade is nothing like the Skywalkers that preceded him. He's nothing like Luke. He's nothing like Anakin. He's nothing like Ben Skywalker, though I don't know what Ben Skywalker would be like as an adult, because we will never know, thanks to, well, the EU being decanonized. We may never know what happens to Ben Skywalker, but Cade is his own character. In fact, even though he may be a Skywalker, he doesn't feel like the typical Skywalker. He feels completely different. He's a bounty hunter. He suffers severe PTSD because of what happened at the very beginning of the series. I mean, Cade is an interesting character. And in the first story arc that introduces him, I feel like by the time you're done, you may want to read more if because considering how interesting, he is because he isn't your typical Jedi. Another thing that I like is Darth Krayt. He's an interesting villain. And now that I've read everything, in Republic, I know who Darth Krayt is, and this is going to be severely enhanced for me when I eventually do read the later arcs of Legacy. The one Sith aren't, the same as the rule of two, which is interesting. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that this one arc establishes, and it does it really well. It really does. And of course, as usual, and since I know some of people are going to get tired of this, but I talk about the art in comics because when you're reading a comic, the art is important. And as usual, it doesn't disappoint. The art is great. It's done by the same people, and I'm convinced it is, that did the Republic comics, which, for me, the Republic comics are my favorite Star Wars comics, and I'm glad that the same artist is doing the art for this, because it fits for the era that takes place after the movies, but still close enough in the timeline where, it looks like it could take place close to that era. And John Ostrander, as usual, does amazing stuff. Legacy is as good as it was when I first read it, at least the first arc, Broken. Now, if you don't want to, read a long series, or you're more of a visual person, pick up Legacy. You don't need to read a bunch of stuff in order to actually enjoy it. It stands completely on its own, especially if you don't want to, read the whole series because you may not like the concept of it taking place in the future. Just at least read the first story arc and give it a chance, because I think it's worth it. I give this a classic rating. And next time, well, I'm going to review, maybe I'll surprise you, because I'm not going to make that mistake I did when I reviewed the Clone Wars related material. This is Darth Sinovia, over and out. May the Force be with you always.